Now, where do we actually get started? Well, I like to start by just opening up my code editor. And if you do that, you're going to see some kind of welcome screen if you have just freshly installed Visual Studio Code. I don't want to see this every time I open up my code editor, so I'm going to click this. And the way that Visual Studio Code works is you need to open a folder. So we're going to create files and folders, but you need to have one root folder, or basically the starting point of your project. So you can click on Open Folder, and somewhere in your file system, you may create a new folder and then just open that one up. Or what you can also do, what I like to do, is I will put this on the side. And here, if I'm just creating quickly a new app, I can just on my desktop here, right click, create a new folder here, and I will call this fancy-counter. All right, so now I have an empty folder here on my desktop, and now I can open that up here. Let's see, I have desktop, and I then have fancy counter, which is currently empty. And I'm on MacBook, by the way, so the file system here is going to look a little bit different than if you're on Windows. That's not a problem at all. I actually am a very heavy Windows user. I recently bought this MacBook, and I can already tell you that everything works the same, right? So the UI may look a little bit different, but it all works the same. So now you can click on fancy counter, or in my case, fancy counter, this folder, and I click on open. And now this folder is opened here. So if I create a file here, I will call that test.js, let's say. If I now open up this folder on my computer, you will see that there is now a file called test.js, right? So whatever you see here is the same as here on your local computer file system. That's how Visual Studio Code works. It just puts all of those folders and files here for us to easily edit them and change them in any way we want. Now we're not going to have a test.js file, so let's actually just delete this. And let me make this a little bit better. What we're going to do is we're going to use a tool that can create all the files that we're going to need to get started. Right, so technically we could create all of those files ourselves manually, but we're going to use a special tool for that, and that tool is called Vite. So before Vite, we were using something called Create React App, or CRA, to get started with the React project. But CRA has been deprecated, and now the React team recommends also that you move away from it. Vite basically has replaced it. So Vite is something that will help you get started with your front-end project. And it's not only for React, but it's also for Vue, for example. Now, it doesn't have all of the benefits that you get with Next.js, right? So later in the course, we'll talk about Next.js. But Vite is a quick way to get started with a simple React project. So how do we use Vite? Well, we need to open up a terminal. And a terminal sounds and looks maybe a little bit scary, but you don't have to be scared. You can open a terminal in multiple ways. On Windows, you can do Control tilde sign. And on my MacBook here, I should be able to do Control tilde sign as well. And you will see something like this, so a terminal. Now I'm on Mac here, and by default, it's called the Z shell. And on Windows, it's going to be called PowerShell or maybe CMD, the command prompt. And let me zoom in a little bit here. Now the commands that we're going to write here are all the same. So don't worry, it's all very basic and it's going to be all the same. You should also be able to open up this terminal here in the top bar somewhere. You will see maybe something called terminal, and then there's new terminal and some other options as well, but we only need this one right now. So now we want to get started with our project. So I'm going to say npm, which is something that you should have on your computer because npm comes installed with Node.js. So when you write npm, your computer will know what to do with it. And then we can say create, and we're going to write Vite here. Now, before you press enter or do anything, it's very important that we use the same versions in our projects because we are living in a time where things change really quickly. So by the time that you're watching this video, something may have already changed a little bit. And now most of the time, that's not going to be an issue. But sometimes a little detail here or there changes and it can cause issues. So before you press enter, just wait until I've finished writing here. So it's going to be Vite, and then we can specify a version. Right, so here it's important that you use the same version as me in the video. It's going to be 4.4.1. And what this will do is it will create a folder for us. But we have already created a folder here. So we just want to specify to Vite, put all those files here in this folder that we already created. And we can do that with a dot. All right, so this is the command that we're going to run. So let's see what happens if I now press enter. So Vite will actually just guide you through some setup here. It will need to install something here. We will say yes. And then it wants to know what kind of project we're trying to create. Well, here we're in a React and Next.js course. So obviously we're going to use React. There are some other options here as well that may be of interest to you. For example, vanilla. Vanilla JavaScript just means plain JavaScript. We also have Vue, which is a competitor essentially to React. It's a little bit less popular than React. There's also Preact and some other ones as well. And usually they have some kind of advantage over normal JavaScript. So for Preact, for example, I think they're a little bit smaller. So the bundle size, meaning the app, what you actually ship to the browser, is a bit smaller than standard React. Some of them may differentiate themselves based on syntax, but for this course, we'll stick to React. So we can select React here and I will press enter. All right, so then it's asking us, do we want to use TypeScript or do we want to use JavaScript? Now, I want to focus on the fundamentals of React first before we dive into TypeScript. TypeScript is a language in and of itself, and then when we start using it with React, there are some special cases. So it brings some complexity. So before we even start doing that, let's just focus on the fundamentals of React first. So here we're going to use JavaScript. Now it also asks us about something called SWC, and this is a bundler. We're just going to use the normal version here. I will press enter. All right, so now we have scaffolded a project, which means it has just created a bunch of files for us. And then it also says done. Now run npm install and npm run dev. So before we do that, let's just actually see what we get here. So we have a bunch of files here, and among them we see this HTML file. And if I make this a little bit bigger, you can see what's written in here. I'm gonna close the terminal here. Actually, I can just drag it down. It will still run in the background if you have something running there. But what we see here is actually just a very basic HTML file. If you've learned HTML, this should all be somewhat familiar to you. Now we see some special things here. They put the link of the fav icon in front of the viewport. I think usually you have these meta tags at the top and then you have the fav icon here. So I will just format it like this, but that doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to make it seem a little bit more familiar to you. So here it's linking to /vite.svg. So this is not an external link. This is some link that's pointing to somewhere local here in our file system. So where is this Vite SVG file? These static files are in the public folder. That's what the public folder is for. Here you would put things like images or maybe PDF files, maybe robots.txt. So then we also have this title. The title is what you see at the top of the tab as well. And this is also something that if you're going to rank on Google, Google will also display the title in the search rankings. So in the head, we always have this metadata about the page. And then in the body, we have the actual content, you could say. So right now, we just have an empty div here, but it does have an ID. And the ID is called root. And then we also have this script at the bottom here. And this script is, well, empty here. It's linking to an external script. And that's located here in the source main.jsx. So this is not a typical extension, right? So if you've been learning HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, this is going to look a little bit strange, JSX. So let's find that script. I'm going to open up the source folder here. And here we have that main.jsx script. So I'm going to open that up. And here we see our first bit of React code, you could say. So let's see what's going on here. So we have some imports at the top. You do not need React to import things these days in JavaScript files. We can import and export things to other files. So something like this would work perfectly fine in a normal JavaScript file as well. But here we are in a JSX file. And why is it called JSX? Why isn't this just a JS file? Well, it's because here we are doing something special that typically wouldn't work in a normal JavaScript file. So this syntax here, which is very similar to what you would see as a normal HTML tag, this is called JSX, right? So this is JSX specific format. And this is how we build our React apps. So a React app is a collection of components, and these components, they have certain tags, just like in HTML, right? So it's essentially just a copy of HTML. Now here it says React strict mode. which puts everything in here, the app. It puts it in a strict mode. We'll see what that means. I mean, it's not that interesting. It doesn't do that many things. It just makes it a little bit more strict. And then we have this app, and this is a component, and we can see this app is coming from some other file. That's the app.jsx file, and this app is rendered. All right, so here we see render, and we have some other intimidating looking things here: create root, react DOM. Now, to be honest, we don't really need to know what's going on here right now. It's not really the beginners. They immediately want to know, create root, what is this? It's just not really important. As a React developer, you are rarely going to do things like create root. This is just to boot up React essentially into our HTML file. Because if we take a look at this, it's doing something document get element by ID root, right? So here we have that empty div, but it has an ID of root. And this script here is selecting that div, right? So it's selecting that div, and it's basically marking that div as a root of our application, of our React application, and it's going to put this in that div, right? So all of the fundamentals still work the same. We have HTML, we have JavaScript, and we also have CSS. We'll talk about that in a second. But this is now the root of our application, right? Normal HTML, and then with that main.jsx script, here we're going to have all of our components. The app is going to be in here. Right now, what do we have in that app component right now? If I open that up, Vite has some basic stuff here, right? So all of these scaffolders like Vite, and we'll also see this with Next.js, they just have some standard boilerplate just to fill up the page a little bit and see if everything works. They are also using use state here, which is not important for now. So I'm going to delete a lot of this. And this is very common with new projects. You're going to delete a lot of that boilerplate. We will also talk more about CSS later. So I'm going to delete that import for CSS. We actually don't need any of these imports. So I'm going to delete all of that. And I will actually delete all of this in here as well. So I'm going to delete everything here. And here we see app. And the only thing we will return here is perhaps a paragraph, and we will say something like, hello, everyone. All right. So now I made some changes. You can see the format here is quite ugly right now. Now I have set up prettier. So now when I run Command Save or Control S for Windows, if I save this file, it's immediately formatted for me. And that's thanks to prettier. Now I made some changes in the HTML file as well. I changed the order here. So if I save here now, it will also format everything for me again. And let's actually change the title here to fancy counter. All right, so if I save here, now let's actually try to open this up in the browser and see what we get. And a website always starts with an HTML file. And the HTML file then in turn can link to CSS or JavaScript or images actually. Right? But it always starts with HTML. Once the browser receives the HTML file, it will go line by line. And here, eventually, it will see some div with an ID of root. And then it will see this script here. And it will run that script. And let's see, that's this script. And it will put the app in there. So what is the app? Well, this is a component. And this component is currently it's just going to display a paragraph here with hello, everyone. We'll talk about how components work in a second. So now what we expect to happen here is that we will have this div, and this script will put this app in there, and that's just gonna display a paragraph. So in here, what we expect to see in the browser when we open this up is just a paragraph with that text. So how do we run our app and how do we see this in the browser? Well, if we look in the package.json, we can see that, a package.json file is basically a description about our project, and it has a name and other things as well. That's not really important because typically you use the package.json more if you're creating a package for NPM, but it has also become a standard way of describing our projects, even though we're not creating a package for NPM here. Now, the important parts of a package.json are the following. So you have dependencies. These are split up by what you're going to need during production and also what you're going to need only during development. And there's a split here because if you don't need it for production, then you don't need to download this in a production setting, right? So it saves some space. So Vite has already created this package.json for us as well with all of the packages that we're going to need, but these are not installed yet. So if I open up the terminal again with Control tilde sign, or you can go to terminal and then new terminal. If we look at this instruction from Vite here, it says npm install and npm run dev. So first we need to do npm install, which will install all of those packages. When I do that and press enter, you can see it starts to install everything. Okay, so after some time that has finished, I can close the terminal here again. And now you can see we have an additional folder here called node modules, which stores all of those packages code. Right, so here we can see that React should be installed here. So if we now scroll down here to the letter R, let's see, R React here is installed, right? And this is the code that we installed for React. We don't have to know much about the inner details here, but I just wanted to show you that these packages are now installed and they are in the node modules folder. Now, here we may see like 10 packages, but here we have many more. How's that possible? Well, that is because these packages in turn also depend on other packages, right? So here we installed Vite, the Vite package here as well. So if we look for Vite, here I found Vite. Vite also has a package.json. I can open that up. And if I scroll down here, it also has dependencies. So it depends on PostCSS and ESBuild and rollup. So they are also automatically installed for us because otherwise Vite wouldn't work, right? And those packages in turn also depend on other packages, right? So with npm, you are automatically going to install all the necessary dependencies, right? That's one of the benefits of using a package manager. It handles all of that for you behind the scenes. We don't have to manually install ESBuild and PostCSS here as well, and whatever they then depend on. That's all handled for you with npm. Okay, so let me close this. We don't usually have to work in the node modules folder. So what else we have here is scripts. So scripts are things you can run and usually they do something or they manipulate some files. And here we see a dev script. The name is dev. The actual content of the script is just Vite. We also have a build script, a lint script, and preview. So what we're going to run during development is actually this dev script. And that's also what was suggested for us here after we used the Vite scaffolding, right? So here it says npm run dev. That's this script that we're going to run. So let's actually run that script, npm run dev. And now when I do that, you can see that it has spun up a so-called server. And what that server essentially does is it goes through all of our files here and makes it work so that we can now actually visit this in the browser. There are also other scripts like this build script, which will do something similar as here, but it will optimize the final outcome even more so that we can then use that for production, right? So this is for development, this is for production. If you want to see the result of that build here locally, you can use the preview script. And lint is just something you can use for linting. So for example, you want to make sure that you have a certain syntax, but this is not something that we're going to use here. But we now have run this dev script. So now we should be able to see our app here, and it will also show us where we can find that. I can use command and then click that to open that up. And I actually want to display it here next to my code editor. So I will just do it a little bit differently. I will just open up a new window here. I will put this on the side, and now I can go in my browser and I can go to that address, right? I could copy that, I can click it, but if I copy this and paste this right here, we now see that our app is running here. It's a bit difficult to see, so let me zoom in a little bit. So if I zoom in here, you can see that we have some text here called hello everyone. I can move this terminal down here again. It will keep running, so this doesn't terminate the process. Let me make this a little bit wider. Let me close the package.json file here. So now what did we see here? Our app.jsx, this is a component, we'll talk more about components in a second, is just displaying a paragraph here called hello everyone, and that is actually what we see here. And how is that possible? Well, it's because here we essentially gave the HTML file to the browser, or Vite did that for us. And in this HTML file, we run a script, that's this script. This script selects that empty div, right, this root, and it essentially puts our entire app in there, right? So here right now we just have one component, that's the app component, and the only thing it does here is return this paragraph, right? So now here we have this paragraph. If we inspect this, we can see that in the HTML structure, it's the same as what we have in this file, right? So we have this div with ID of root, and then we have that script. But now this div with ID of root is not empty. So if I open it up, we indeed see this paragraph here saying hello everyone, right? So this is how everything is structured. Now, of course, we will not have just one component. We're going to add more components in here. So our entire app will essentially just be here in this div with ID of root. Right, so that's how everything works behind the scenes. That's all you need to know for now. Now, what else do we get here? Let's quickly go through it just to give you some clarity on that as well. So if I just close everything here, close all. So on the left side here, we have our fancy counter folder. That's the folder that we opened up. That's our starter folder, or more often called the root folder, the root directory of our project. And typically what you're going to have in the first level essentially here is configuration files. So here we already saw the package.json file, which is basically just a description of our project, like what are the things that you need in order for this project to run, right? So these are the packages, most importantly, which is important, right? Because if we work on the same project with other people and other people also want to use this project on their local computers, well, it needs to be we need to have an accurate description of what they also need in order to run this project successfully. That's why we have the package.json file, and that's also why we have this package log.json file, which is essentially an even more detailed description of what packages you need. So this keeps track of all the versions of the packages and also what those packages depend on, right? So a complete description of the entire tree of dependencies that you need. Typically, we don't really have to work with this. Let's see what else we have. We also have this Vite config file. We can make certain configurations for how we want things to run. Not really important right now. It's also not really something that you typically are working in. And that's actually the case for many of these configuration files. You are typically not really working in these configuration files. So here's another one, ESLint. So here you can specify how ESLint should work. For example, with ESLint, if we declare a variable, right? So here in a component, what I can do is I can create a variable. So I can say the variable blah blah. Let's assign the number 5 to there. Now, if I just leave it like this, ESLint will actually complain because I'm creating this variable, but I'm never using it. So it's kind of useless that I've created this. And so that's why we're using ESLint. Let me remove this for now. Now, ESLint, I have also installed that as an extension here in Visual Studio Code. So this will already have certain settings, but if you then also have a configuration file here, this will take precedence. These settings here will be more important than the extension itself. And this is useful because this extension in my code editor here is for me only, for me locally. But what if other people are also working on the same project? We probably want to have the same rules, right? So then it makes sense to have a configuration file so that everybody who works has the same configuration for ESLint. Maybe we don't want to get a warning when we just use a variable because maybe it's annoying and we don't need that level of strictness, right? So here we could configure that so that it won't give us a warning if we haven't used a variable. Okay, so that's ESLint. What else do we see here? We also see git ignore. So we use git to easily work with our code base. For example, we want to send it to some other place like GitHub. We'll see how that works. And we don't want to send everything to GitHub. For example, all of these node modules, we don't want to send everything because these node modules take up a ton of space. But if somebody else wants to run our project, they still need to know which node modules they need, right? So shouldn't we just send over those node modules? Well, no, because it takes up too much space. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to describe in the package.json and package.log.json files which packages do you need to successfully run this project. And then that other person will run npm install, right? So npm install will automatically look at whatever you put here in the dependencies list and then install those packages for node modules, right? So that's how other people can get the node modules, right? And with git ignore, we can specify don't send node modules, right? So we don't want to send the whole folder, it's too much. It's too much space. So we're not going to send the node modules when we use git to send over our code base to some other place. We also use git for other things like version management of our code base and other things. We'll talk more about that later, but this is used for configuration of git essentially. And then we also have this readme file. It's in markdown format. This is basically just, well, you can put whatever you want here, maybe some instructions on how to run this project, or maybe some other explanation. This is typically displayed. When you go to a GitHub repository, this is typically what you will see displayed, this file. GitHub will automatically display this file, and other websites like GitLab as well. It's not really important right now. So typically you're going to have a bunch of configuration files here in the root of your project. Now we also see our HTML file here, and I personally think it's a mistake. I think Vite should put it in the source folder, because the HTML file, it's not really a configuration file. I think I would prefer to see this here, but it's not a big deal. These configuration files, usually they have all sorts of weird names. So here it's .gitignore, it's .eslint.rc.cjs, so it's a strange extension. This is in JSON format, this is in Markdown, this is in plain JavaScript. You don't have to worry about those names. This is just the world of JavaScript. There are some jokes about that. But that's basically what you're going to see in the root of your projects. So then we have the folders. So we have node modules. We already talked about that. It stores all of the dependencies code. We have the public folder for static files, for a fav icon, or maybe you're using a PDF file or robots.txt. Those types of files go in here. All right, so then typically we also have a source folder or source directory. The word directory and folder are often used interchangeably, but directory is the more official name. So the source directory contains the code where you as a developer will spend most of your time in. So here is where we're going to write most of our code, really the source code. And it also has this assets folder, which is a little bit confusing because this is also for static assets. So just like the public folder, we also in Vite get this assets folder. Now the idea here is that here you put the images that you are actually going to use and reference in your components, so that Vite can further optimize them. So if you're not going to reference them, put them in the public, and otherwise we put them in the assets folder. I think that's also confusing and I'm not a fan of it, but we don't need to know more about that. So then we have the app.jsx component. We also have app.css, which is the CSS for our app.jsx, but we will talk more about styling later, right? So CSS is obviously for styling. We don't need that right now, so I'm going to delete it. And then we also have index.css, which is used for more general styling, not specific to one component, but we also don't want this right now, so I'm going to delete that as well. So our app right now is just one component, and we know it's a component because it's written with the capital case here in the file name, as well as here in the function, it's a capital case. And that's our entire app right now. We just have one component, and this main.jsx file injects that component in that empty div in the HTML file. Right, so that was quite a bit to take in. I hope you're not sleeping right now, but that's how a Vite project is structured. Right, so I just wanted to give you some clarity on how everything works and what are all these weird files that you see here. Now we're really going to build a React app, and to do that, of course, we need to know what components are. So this is one component, but we're going to have multiple components. But what is a component? I also saw that we have some errors here. So here, let's check the console. We have some issues here. So here we deleted the CSS files. So here some other files were importing that. So here in the main, we were importing that. So we can remove that here, or we should remove it. And then let's see, it's importing this app component from app.jsx, which still exists. And it's importing React DOM and React, and we still need that. So I'm going to save here, and that should get rid of the errors. And now when we do that, we actually also see different styling here because we removed the CSS file. All right, so that was quite a lot to take in. That's okay. You don't have to completely understand the whole system here right now. Let's just get started building our application. Now, one last thing actually is we see this assets folder with react.svg. We are not going to use this SVG, and we're also not going to use this folder. So I propose that we also remove this. And this is very common, by the way, when you create a new project and those projects come with boilerplates. Right, so Vite as well as Next.js, they have standard stuff going on. We're going to remove a bunch of stuff just to have a clean slate. Right, so we're not doing anything crazy here. This is actually quite typical. All right, so then actually let's get started.